The street protest that forced a president to flee. Will what's happened in Tunisia herald similar uprisings across the Arab world? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme with me, David Foster. Talk about prophetic. Just 2 days ago here in Doha, I was sitting next to the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when she told the Arab world to change or be changed.
Corruption is a cancer, and it eats away not only at the heart of a country by depriving the people of access to resources that come from the sweat of the efforts of the people, but that it is short-sighted. You know, you can make a lot of money in a non-corrupt system if you are working hard, and that's what should be encouraged.
Go back to events that triggered the uprising in Tunisia. Mohamed Bouazizi, the 26-year-old unemployed graduate who'd been abused by the police, set fire to himself in a public square last month, and his story resonated far beyond his hometown. Arabs living under similar conditions identified with the young Tunisian because his problems, unemployment, corruption, autocracy, the absence of human rights, are their problems. Throughout the region, there is what some call a dignity deficit. They say many Arab men and women are watching unfolding events in Tunisia with envy for what they see as real hope for change. Meanwhile, Arab leaders watch events wary of their future, perhaps threatened by what may be coming next. Similar in many ways to Ben Ali, the now ex-president of Tunisia, they're often former army officers. They've made early unfulfilled promises, have been ruling for decades and have taken their countries down economically with rampant corruption. Similar too in that they run their countries with an iron fist, surrounded by an elite group controlling both the money and the political power. And what is more, in an age of globalization, these rulers can no longer cut their citizens off from news or from each other. The internet and social media have bypassed the constraints, and Arab media could sense their audience's thirst for news about Bouazizi's death and the extraordinary drama it triggered in Tunisia. Well, joining us now, our guests in London, we have the Tunisian academic Noureddin Meladi, lecturer of media and sociology at the University of Northampton. In Cairo, Abdullah Ali Shah, professor of international law at the American University in the Egyptian capital. He was the assistant of the former Egyptian foreign minister. And in New York, John Entelis, professor of political science at Fordham University, editor-in-chief of the Journal of North African Studies. Let's begin with all three of you at once, if we may. One-word answer, starting first of all with London. Did you see this coming?
No.
Cairo?
No.
New York?
Yes.
OK, 2 no's. Now, this is very interesting. Let me talk to you, first of all, Noureddin, in London. Now, you were on our programme about a week ago, and you did say that it was encouraging what was happening. Is it the speed of what's happened that surprised you?
Yeah, I think what has been not anticipated by any sociologist or any politician or any other analyst was the dramatic speed of how events basically have come to unfold, with the complete kind of stepping down of President Ben Ali and what has been also going on with regard to Mohamed Ghannouchi stepping in to put himself as the president, and then within few hours he also hand over the power to the Speaker of the Parliament. And I think this is what is very interesting.
Abdullah Ali Shah in Cairo, get a no from you. Why do you think it wasn't possible to predict this?
When these events erupted in Tunisia, 2 factors had been introduced which hadn't been expected by anyone. The first is that we know how the dictatorial regime in Tunisia is confining everything in its own hand. And secondly, the reaction of the Arab street till now hadn't been expected to be very fast and very devastating and also very alarming.
John Entelis joining us from New York. I know you've lived in Tunisia, so tell me a little bit about why you did think this was predictable.
Well, for anyone who was studying Tunisia over these decades, it became very evident the increased tension and discontinuity between the state and civil society. The discontent had been mounting on many fronts, politically, economically, socially. The only question was going to be when and how, and that's always very difficult to determine. But all the preconditions necessary for a challenge to the regime were developing among a highly educated population that was increasingly being denied its political and social and economic rights. So the real paradox for most of us is why hadn't this happened earlier rather than that it would happen at all.
Could it have happened, let's say, in Algeria, where there were protests last month? Could it happen in other countries, such as Egypt?
Well, in fact, it did happen. In some ways, this situation resembles October 1988 in Algeria, when mass demonstrations led to the government having to concede its singular power by amending the constitution and allowing multi-party democratic elections to take place, in which an Islamic party won overwhelmingly both local municipal elections as later on parliamentary elections, but which led to a military coup. And that's maybe the model that one has to be concerned about. Does a popular uprising leading to a moment of democratic opportunity get confiscated by the military and those in power who are unwilling to accept the consequences of this democracy?
Okay, so let's go to Nuruddin Meladi and ask you about the worrying scenario as painted there by our guest in New York. An uprising is all very well, but you have to have something positive to make it a successful one as far as the people are concerned. Is that possible in Tunisia?
I think this is the worry for everyone, actually, is that these efforts that has been basically organized by excellent networks of young people, also academics and civil society organizations, can be hijacked by even the previous rulers of the RCD, the ruling regime. And I think what are the political basically powers are calling for now? I mean the opposition, the legitimate law opposition and opposition that is considered outlawed. What are they calling for is a government, a rule that encompasses everyone. Every citizen in the country is allowed to be a member of parliament. Every citizen in the country is should be allowed in the future to become a president, to become an MP, to become part of the ruling government. And I think this is what we are calling for. And there are lots of voices that are coming up now from lawyers, from academics, from ex-politicians and so forth. I think looking forward to a picture like this. That's why I think Mohammed Ghannouchi last night, when he placed himself as the next after Ben Ali, he didn't survive. He survived only for one night. And he realized that people are not going to believe what he is calling for. And people in the streets, what we read in the circulations of Facebook pages and Twitter feeds and so forth, I think testify that people are very much aware of the I shall call it the lies of the previous regime and the people who are remaining from the previous regime. That unless people take charge of their affairs and move forward towards a real democracy, real opening up of freedom of expression, political life and organization and so forth, we can't get anywhere.
We're looking at some extraordinary pictures on our screen here of the security forces embracing the protesters, most of whom happen to be particularly young. And I'd like to come back later in the programme to how it's all going to unfold in Tunisia in particular, but at the moment I'd like to broaden it out. And Abdullah Ali Shah in Cairo, I think it's somewhere between half and 2/3 of the population of Middle Eastern and African countries is under 25. Many of them will be internet savvy, aware of all the social networking sites, seeing pictures on Facebook. Is it possible now in countries such as your own, Egypt, for the youths to see this and not do anything about it?
Yes, I think Egypt could see something like what happened in Tunisia on one condition, that the national movement should be alienated, because in fact they are delaying any interaction between the streets and the government. Our national movement, in fact, has many connections with the government. and they are employed by the government as a middle stage between them and also the population. So in this case, I think that the population is apt to do anything like Tunisia and more dangerous and devastating. But the problem is that we don't have this triggering engine, and this triggering engine could be in one of the events, something like this. But anyhow, the Egyptian society is totally ready for the explosion.
And how do you see it unfolding?
I think that if the national movement could be liberated from the repercussions of its past reputation and its connections with the government or the authority, and be very much near to the streets and pulses of the people, this would be very good for them. But I don't want Egypt to be repeating the same scene in Egypt, because Egypt is very big in population. It has many hazards for the future. It could be a very bombastic chaos in Egypt. So even in Tunisia, we have two stages now. We have one, the explosion, and the population could also uproot the regime. But what about the new regime? It's very difficult to install another proper regime to reflect the wishes of the government, of the people. So the same in Egypt. We need something ready for that. And I think that the government would read very seriously what happened in Tunisia. And in this case, it could make some forestalling steps or measures so as to delay the explosion.
Well, let me bring in John Entellis at this point. If you take a look across the region and were to pick, let's say, two countries where it's possible that similar events to those in Tunisia could take place, would it be Egypt and one other?
Well, again, Algeria is an important example. Egypt as well. I think the size of the countries are less important than the commonality of the political systems that are in place, in which authoritarian governments have imposed their will against an unwilling public. And in what makes Tunisia so important and is representative as a model for others is that the first and most important stage, which is the removal of these dictatorial regimes, which have been impossible to in any way upset or remove or change, that this happened at all, I think, is an extremely important first stage. Now, to be sure, what follows is going to be as important as well. Though Tunisia, I think, has advantages that others do not have, given the size of the country, the educational level, the political consciousness, the existence of different groups and organizations that, if they can work together, create some kind of political coalition that could form a viable alternative to the incumbent government.
I mean, but let's bring in some of the other Arab countries across the region. Let's bring in Saudi Arabia. Will the leaders of Saudi Arabia be worried what they see? Will Muammar Gaddafi in Libya be worried by what he sees?
Well, I think, as I said, they should all be worried to the extent that, as the Tunisian example has shown, it could be a fairly small event that would otherwise be unnoticed, that can catalyze a much larger social and political movement, because all the elements of discontent already exist in these countries. The enormous gap in the political opportunities available to these mass publics, the discontent that arises out of that, the discontent that emerges with the lack of opportunity because you have societies that are overeducated and underemployed. So all these elements are sort of, in a way, waiting to be catalyzed. So I think any one of these countries could, at any one moment, by an incident, let's say, in the Sahara in the case of Morocco, or in the case of food price increase in the case of Algeria, or as in the case of Tunisia with the unemployed youth, or in the case of Egypt, whether it's the fraudulent elections or whether it's the religious conflict between Copts and Muslims. So the catalytic event is not as important as the preconditions that establish an environment where an uprising can take place.
Okay, a quick thought from Abdullah Ali Shah before we go back to specific events in Tunisia. If Hillary Clinton sat there as she did in Doha, hoping to prevent Arab leaders facing this kind of situation, because by and large the United States would like to have many of these regimes in place for its own reasons. Would it have been possible for them to have prevented this happening if they'd listened earlier to what the United States was saying, and that what it was saying was reform now before it's too late?
Yes, I think these regimes are trying to delay the explosion. But the explosion is, I think, is going to be taking place unless the governments are sincere enough and honest, and they can reverse all the institutions and all the measures which had been taking place. For example, we are calling for President Mubarak to form a coalition government and to make another elections which are free and transparent, and to reverse all the measures which had been taken, the Shura Assembly and the People's Assembly. So I think if they get to the right path now, they can do something. But if they think that the people are not ready for anything, and they are guaranteed, and the security forces are controlling, and they are depending mainly on security, not on the political approaches, I think the explosion is coming.
Thanks very much indeed. Just before I came into the studio, the Reuters news agency reported that Ghannouchi, the Prime Minister who became president for a short while, had talks with union leaders in Tunisia. And this is what the union leader said. "We discussed the idea of a coalition government. The Prime Minister accepted our request for this." So events moving on apace in Tunisia itself. Worth reflecting on the state of the opposition now. Some opposition leaders have been invited to return home from abroad. Technically, though, opposition parties in Tunisia have been allowed, but with no real chance of gaining power. Since 1999, the former President Ben Ali's regime had given 25% of the parliamentary seats, 25% of the parliamentary seats to carefully selected groups of the opposition. Tunisia has had 6 of these, quote, legal or loyal opposition parties. And on the other hand, there are 3 illegal or non-recognised parties: Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Tunisian Workers' Communist Party, and the Islamist Renaissance, or Ennahda Party, which was formed in 1981. But dealing with political Islam remains an issue. The Tunisian opposition is still very weak. Many observers believe leadership reform is also essential within the opposition parties. The average age of the opposition leaders close to 70 years, and Ben Ali himself 74. Nuruddin Muladi, let's bring you in as a Tunisian. What do you think the most important thing for stability in your country is now?
I think a very important move by the next government is to be inclusive of all these varieties that you've been talking about in the Tunisian scene. And it's very important for us as a country to avoid become another Afghanistan, become another Iraq, is really to stop any form of radicalization of these young people in the future by including all of this variety in terms of political tendencies, ideologies and so forth within the political rule. So here I'm specifically talking about political Islam like Ennahda, the so-called, for example, radical Communist Party by Hamel Hammami, the nationalists. All these varieties, they constitute the fabric of the Tunisian society, in addition to what is actually existing now. Even the previous ruling regime and its leaders, they shouldn't be excluded also from participating in ruling the country. And I think a general election, a real democratic general election, will bring in the true mosaic of what should be a government running the country in the future. This is very challenging, this is not easy, but all of these people should sit down together on the table and truly debate and truly think about the solution. They shouldn't. I mean, as I said in the beginning, every Tunisian has the right by constitution to become a president. Every Tunisian by constitution has the right to become a member of parliament and so forth. The last 50 years of the rule of Bourguiba and next after him of Ben Ali tells a complete different picture. Only the people whom these regimes like and they think they can be associated with them are allowed to be part of the government itself. Now, you've been talking about the opposition is represented in about 25% in the previous Tunisian parliament. That's absolutely true.
But it's not a real opposition, is it? It's not a real opposition at all. It's allowed by the government.
Serve his agenda and nothing else.
OK, thanks very much indeed. John Entelis, are they going to be worried in the White House about what's happening in Tunisia and, by extension, what could happen across the broader Middle East and North Africa?
Well, what's interesting is both Hillary Clinton's comments in Doha that you cited and President Obama's comments after Ben Ali left Tunisia, I think are indicative of a change, at least in tone and hopefully in policy, regarding the utility of aligning American policy with dictators whose principal advantage from the American perspective is that they're stable, that they are willing to work with the U.S. in the war against terrorism, quote unquote, that they essentially take more moderate positions on issues in international affairs, rather than how they are viewed by their own people, the way in which they govern, and particularly the oppressive and corrupt manner in which these governments have maintained themselves these many years. So I'd like to think that the rhetoric reflects a new reality on the part of American foreign policy, and that the experiences of Iran in 1979 and Algeria in 1992, in which the U.S. was on the wrong side of both of those uprisings and revolutions, that those lessons will be absorbed, and that the U.S. now will be cautious and supportive of the populist character of what's happened in Tunisia.
But how will the United States, in its own interests, how will the United States, in its own interests, ensure that the vacuum isn't filled by groups it would consider to be extremists?
Well, it has to allow the popular will to form its own identity and its own agenda, if it's done in a democratic and pluralistic fashion, assuming that the Tunisian experience moves on to a stage of genuine collaboration among various groups and organizations that we've been citing, though I have some difficulty in linking the outlawed organizations, and you cited the age of the leaders such as Hamami, who was a Marxist, or Rashid Ghanouchi, the head of Al-Nahda, or even someone like Najib Shabbi. I mean, these are old-time individuals who have long contested the regime, but who are in some ways disconnected with the populist uprising that is represented by the youth. And I'm not sure that the youth is available or identifies with these old-line opposition figures.
And can I ask, sorry to stop you there, John, but can I just ask Abdullah Ali Shah, because we're talking about old-line government people, and Mubarak is well into his 80s. As he seems to be preparing for his son's succession, will he be a worried man?
I think the regime in Egypt is very much worried because all the explosive elements are available in Egypt, and more than Tunisia, because in Tunisia we are too much similar in many things. But in addition to that, the regime had failed to cement the national unity between Muslims and Christians. And secondly, the Nile water is threatened seriously. And thirdly, what happened in Sudan and what is expected to be happening in Egypt and other states concerning the partition or Lebanization of Egypt. I think these are the dangers which the regime is unable to face.
Thank you. I'm going to have to stop you there because I want to, before the programme ends, to just bring in some other words from Hillary Clinton, which she said in Doha the other day, referring to Arab regimes. She put out this message: those who cling to the status quo may be able to hold back the full impact of their country's problems for a little while, but not forever. Thank you very much to our guests in London, Nuruddin Maladi, in Cairo, Abdullah Ali Shah, and in New York, John Entelis. Thank you too for watching this edition of Inside Stories. Drop us a line if you can, insidestory@aljazeera.net, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Until next time, goodbye.